Alright, hi guys, and welcome back to another video. Thanks for joining in. So today my plan is to start getting the mount welded up. The guy's going to be here in about 5 minutes or so, and they're going to get going on that. And then I plan on trying to work on that clutch pedal a little bit more, see if I can't get that in the car and get the clutch master hooked up. And then I want to see if I can't cut the hole to get the cables in and get the center console taken apart so that I can get a shifter put in there. And then I want to get the engine mounted with the transmission. I do have some stuff that I'm going to show you guys here in a little bit that is going to allow me to do that. I got flywheel bolts, I got clutch and flywheel, I got an engine harness that I want to stick on it. So we'll go ahead and get started and I'll show you guys a little bit more. I wish. Okay, so he just got done welding on this bracket and I'm really happy with how it came out. Looks pretty good. He definitely knows what he's doing. It's still a little hot to the touch, but you can see here that I have a stitch weld here and a stitch weld here and then one over here, and then he welded this whole part here and this whole part, and there's a little stitch weld over here. There's no welds on the bottom, but there is still those 2 bolts in the bottom, which I'm going to leave there. And this thing is not going anywhere. This thing is rock solid. So it's officially a K-Series car. Just need to get an engine in it. I do have some other things that I want to get done first before I put the engine in, just because of the ease of access without having the engine in. But before I do any of that, I'm going to get this sanded down, and I'm going to get it primered, painted, and put the clear coat on it, and make it all uniform again. But before I do any of that, I'm gonna go get something to eat because I'm hungry, and this took a little bit longer than I thought it would, just waiting for the guy and getting it all done. So I'm gonna go get something to eat first, and then I will come back and get that painted up. All right, just got back from eating some lunch and we're gonna get back to work. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this, I think it's like 250 grit or 300 grit sanding block here, and I'm going to go ahead and scuff it up so that the primer and the paint sticks. So I'm just going to take this and just basically scruff up the whole thing here before I get started. Alright, so I got it scuffed up pretty much on the whole bracket and kind of the surrounding areas, and I blew off all the dust. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray this with some 91% alcohol. Well, I'm not going to spray, I'm just going to wipe it down just to kind of prep the surface, get any of the oil off, any of that residue that might prevent it from being able to seat properly. So we get this all wiped off, and then we can start laying down the first coat of primer. So I'm just using a Duplicolor automotive primer. Just got it at my local auto parts store. Anyway, we're ready for the first coat, so let's get started on that. I'm just trying to get the areas that don't have anything on it, the bare metal parts. The rest of it will be fine just to hit with the base. Alright, so the primer is all dry, and I went ahead and wiped it down with isopropyl alcohol again and blew it back off, just to get any contamination that might have gotten on there after the primer was done. So I'm using this Duplicolor Perfect Match, the paint coat on it, I don't know where it says it, but it's B95P, which is the paint code for this car that I have. I know it's a pearl, so it's not going to be the easiest to color match, even with having color matching paint, but I'm just going to go ahead and give this a try and see what it looks like when I'm done. I am going to try and get some of these hard to reach spots first, because I don't want to end up spraying them multiple times trying to get them. I don't want to cause any drips. Let's go ahead and give this a try. Well, it's still drying and I have to do another coat, but it definitely came out a little bit lighter than the rest of the car. You can tell a little bit on camera, but in person you can definitely tell. Like I said earlier, when they painted this car, it came out more purple than the original factory color. I think it's just because it's a really hard color to mix. But eventually I'll have them mix me up some of the paint that they make when they do the touch-up, and I'll go ahead and just spray it on, or have them spray it on right here. But at least for now, it's gonna not look as bad as it did with it all grinded off and everything. And I'm still gonna do another second color, or a second coat. I'm hoping that the second coat kind of makes it a little bit darker, because I know pearls are a little weird. I'm definitely not a painter by any means, and I definitely tried to blend it as best as I could, but it's going to turn out the way it's going to turn out, and I'm not disappointed. While that dries, I'm going to go over some of the stuff that I have getting ready for the car to go on, or getting ready for the engine to go in. So this is a clutch that I have. It's from a company called XTD. Came with a flywheel and a clutch and a little pilot bearing, or pilot bushing. It's a cheap clutch. It's from eBay. I have full expectations that it's going to suck, but it might not. But I'm not planning on making any power on this clutch, so it should work just fine. This is a jumper harness. This converts your OBD2B to OBD1. And then these are some OEM used flywheel bolts that I got, because the engine is an automatic, or was an automatic, so it does not have flywheel bolts. And this right here is the actual conversion harness, and I believe I just got an eBay one as well because it was cheap. It's a lot cheaper. If I do run into issues with that, I'll go ahead and get a nicer one from like K-Tuned or something. And this was also an eBay product right here. This is an engine harness. I love these little tags on it. I think that's hilarious. Now I'm gonna have to go through and take them all off, but this is the engine harness, and I believe it's a tucked harness. It's supposed to like imitate rye wire or something like that. And then this right here is a K-swapped throttle cable from Hybrid Racing, because I didn't want to have to use the factory throttle cable and have it like loop around the engine or anything. But my plan here in a little bit is to go ahead and get the engine mounted to the transmission and then get the harness on it. This is the engine right here. It's just been sitting here for a pretty long time. I don't plan on running power steering in this car, so I'm gonna have to, I believe a buddy of mine has a power steering delete kit for a K-swap. It's kind of like a bracket with a pulley on it. So I'm gonna see if I can't have him track that down for me. But here's the engine right here, and the transmission's over in the corner. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on that. All right, so the paint's dry enough at least to put down the clear. It's been about 35, 40 minutes since I did the second coat. And it's definitely lighter. You can see it. I tried to blend it as best as I could, and I feel I did a pretty good job. I'm happy with it, but I do wish that it had come out the same color that the car was painted. For whatever reason, when they were painting this car, they were telling me they were having a hard time matching the paint and getting all the panels to be the same. And they had to go over it a bunch of times to get it to match. But for now, it's going to work, and I don't think it's going to be very obvious or super obvious once everything's in here. But it is dry enough to get the clear going on, and I'm using a Rust-Oleum crystal clear enamel, just a can that I found around. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and put down the first coat. For whatever reason, I always have a hard time laying clear down because it just seems to run, or I put it on too thick. But I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot here. So this is the transmission that I'm going to use. It's just one of the spare trannies I have. It's just an Accord 5-speed trans. I have a lot of these. I probably have like 10 of them. But one thing I noticed about this one is it did not have a reverse switch in it. I was kind of going over it to make sure it has everything, and I noticed this was missing. So I had to go grab one off a spare transmission that I have, and now I'm going to throw this guy in. You do have to put silicone on these threads before you put it in, so I got to get all this old silicone cleaned off, and I got to get the silicone that's sitting on the top of these threads cleaned off, and then I can go ahead and get this guy stuck in. And then also, here's the engine that I have. I did blow it off with the air gun because it has been sitting for a long time. It kind of had dust and cobwebs all over it. But I'm going to go ahead and start taking the intake off this thing because I need to get the harness on and get all this stuff on. I think the harness does wrap under here. This might just be for the charge harness, but either way, I got to make a charge harness, so I'm going to get the intake taken off while it's out of the car, and I can just put it on when it's in the car. This is a K20A, but it is not a Type R engine. It is probably, you know, either out of an EP3 or base model RSX. It was an automatic. So the Type Rs did not come automatic. I'm not sure what it came out of, but it's going to work for what I need it to. It's basically a K20A3 equivalent here in the United States. But it seems like it's all here. I'm going to go ahead and start getting this old harness off. I'm going to get this flex plate off, and I'm going to get the clutch on and get the transmission bolted on. But first I'm going to start with this reverse switch here. Okay, so I got the flywheel bolted up to the engine, and they're torqued down and everything. And one thing I need to do before installing the transmission onto the engine is I need to install this pilot bushing. Now, since this engine originally came with an automatic transmission, it does not have a pilot bushing that I need to remove. I just need to get this one installed. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go ahead and tap it in using this socket. This socket is very, very close to the outside diameter of this pilot bushing, and it fits inside here nice. And I'm just going to use a dead blow here and tap it on evenly in, and I'll show you guys here in a second what that looks like. So I got the pilot bushing installed right there, and I wasn't actually sure if I should go all the way to the back of this hole in the crankshaft or if I should just leave it closer to the center. Either way, this is where I'm going to leave it, and I figure if the transmission has no problem bolting up to the engine and it goes in here, it shouldn't really make that much of a difference. So that's where I'm going to leave it, and that's what it looks like installed. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this transmission and get it over here and get it bolted onto the engine. Okay, so before I mated the trans up to the engine, I forgot that I needed to put on the new clutch release bearing and lube up the input shaft here and everything, make sure it all is freely able to move. And I also went ahead and got the clutch on, and one thing I forgot about was the pressure plate bolts. I do not have any spare pressure plate bolts. I looked everywhere. So what I ended up doing was I ended up just using some factory OEM Honda M10 by 1.5 bolts with a 12mm head, just like this one here. But the ones I used were about a 1/4 inch shorter. I just don't have any extra to show you, but I have 6 of them in there, and I already checked. It spins over completely without hitting any of them. In fact, the back of the bolt is only sticking out maybe a 1/16 of an inch past the flywheel, so it's going to work out perfectly. And if you don't have dowel pins, you need to make sure that you have dowel pins. It's something that a lot of people don't think about, or they just miss those. And it's something that is really going to help seat the engine and transmission together well, and make sure that there's no play between the two, and make sure it's aligned properly. So I have one dowel here, and I have another dowel in the engine here, which is actually in the same spot. So I'm actually gonna have to pull this one out and put it over here in this side. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then I'm gonna mate up the engine and transmission. Engine and transmission are all mounted up together. Got all the bell bolts in, and I spun it over by hand. The transmission's turning, nothing feels like it's bound up or anything, so this is good to go. And next I can get started on tearing that center console apart and seeing what I can do about the shifter and getting that hole drilled. And tomorrow I'll deal with getting the harness on, getting the intake off, getting everything prepped with this thing to go in. I did notice that the coolant thermostat housing cover here is busted off. So I'm gonna have to grab one off of one of the spare engines that I have, which is no big deal. I can get all that addressed tomorrow. But yeah, this whole engine I'm gonna get addressed tomorrow and figure all that out. But for now, I'm gonna continue working on the chassis, getting those cables in, see if I can get that shifter, the shift pedal in, the clutch pedal, and go from there. All right, so I'm inside the cabin here, and as you can see, I got the whole center console here taken apart, and I got the shifter out, and it was pretty easy. It wasn't too bad. This is like the Prindle switch here, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to mess around with this to get the car to start, because there's, like, from the factory, a neutral safety switch built into this or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. I've done it once before on a 4th gen Prelude, but I wasn't K-swapping it, I was just auto manual swapping it. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be something similar to that. When I get to that part, I will definitely address it if I need to. But for now, I'm just going to let this stuff sit out of the way. I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to drill the cable, the hole for the cables, if I even need to. If I can get the shifter to sit right here and the cables can go through here, I'm just going to drill the hole out for this, where the original shifter cable came from, drill it out bigger so the cables can come through there. If not, I'm just going to drill a hole back there and run the cables up here. But that's all something that I'm going to address tomorrow, because it's late and I want to go home. And I never did get the shift pedal in, so I'm open to also do that tomorrow. But overall, I'm happy with the progress I made today. But that's where I'm at, so we'll get started back first thing in the morning. Alright, so I got the shifter installed, and it's not bolted down or anything. I do need to drill out some holes and figure out exactly where I want it, depending on where it lines up with the center console piece. I still want to be able to retain that if I can. If not, whatever. But I do have the cables ran through, and I'm going to go underneath right now and show you guys how I did that. Alright, and as you can see, this is where they come out of the chassis at. I went ahead and took a 3.5 inch hole saw, and I cut a hole in the bottom of the floor pan right there. And just ignore this. This is for the O2 sensor. I'm going to go ahead and tuck that back up in there because I won't be using that. But I went ahead and put some black spray paint around the hole just so that I can try and seal it up and not have it rust or prevent it from rusting. But I ran the cables up over this subframe here and over the sway bar, and then they come out in the engine bay right here, and that's going to work just fine. I made sure that they don't cross over,
and the cables lay flat the entire way. There's no crossing or anything. And so that's how I did it, and hopefully it shifts just fine. If not, I'm gonna have to figure something else out, but for now, that's how I'm gonna run it.
All right, while the paint was drying for the hole that I cut out for the shifter cables, I went ahead and got the engine brackets on, the engine mount and the transmission mount brackets. And I went ahead and took the intake off, and I got this harness put on, at least most of it. There are a bunch of plugs that go on the intake that are not on there. But basically I just got everything that was on there on. And one thing I did have to change out that I didn't realize was this crank position sensor, since this is a JDM motor, did not work. It was just slightly, there was ears for aligning the plug on there, and it was just not the same as the USDM ones. So I had to go to a spare motor that I have and pull one off and put it on here, and then it clicked in just fine. And I will take all these tags off once I get the engine in. I just figured for now I'm just going to keep them on in case I still need them. Although everything kind of lays out pretty much where it's supposed to go. It's not a tucked harness or anything, so they kind of have a little bit extra length, but I don't mind. It was cheap, and hopefully it works out just fine. But this engine is 100% ready to throw into the engine bay. I just need to button up a few things in the engine bay first. And I also took a spare thermostat off a different car that I have. I guess this housing is the entire thermostat. I don't think they come apart. So I went ahead and just swapped it out with another car that I have. And I still have to make a charge harness for this, and the charge and the starting harness. But that's not going to be any big deal. I'm going to wait till it's in the car before I do that. That way I can measure the lengths appropriately, and then I'll put the intake back on. But for now, this thing is ready to go in.
All right, so I got the clutch pedal installed. There's no pressure on it because there's no hydraulic line to it. But one thing I did forget about was the automatic cars have a bigger brake pedal because it doesn't have a clutch pedal here. So these are really close together. So I think eventually I want to go ahead and get the brake pedal that comes on a manual transmission Integra. And this just has 2 bolts in it. It's just going to be good enough for now, just so I can get the car up and running. And eventually I'll address that to get it completely mounted where I want it and get it secured with 4 bolts. But as you can see, the pedal and the clutch master are in. Just need to get a hydraulic line, which I'll do once I get the engine and transmission in. So I think at this point now, I'm just gonna go ahead and get the engine bolted in, and then I can start figuring out all the wiring and the fuel lines. And I do not have I thought I had an extra brake master cylinder, but I do not, so I'm probably gonna have to order one. I've noticed that the ports for the brake lines on an Integra are on the other side for this year. They're not on the driver's side. They're one's on top and one's on the other side. So I'm gonna have to figure out something with the brake master, but I can at least get it up and running without having to worry about that. So the thing I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get it bolted in, and then I'm gonna start getting this wiring figured out. All right, so I got the engine set on a dolly and positioned it somewhat where it needs to be, and I lowered the engine down on it. And now it's basically time to get it aligned with these mounts. And as you can see, it's clocked back more than it needs to be. That bracket down there needs to be with this mount. So I'm gonna take the crane, I'm gonna lift it up, and I'm gonna see if I can't swing it into position where it's supposed to be. And I'm gonna try and get this mount on and that mount on first. And then I'll get this one on last, because where I'm lifting it from is the stud that goes for this. So when I get those 2 lined up, I'll take a floor jack and I'll put it under the engine pan, take the crane off, and then I'll be able to take this chain off and get that mount on. But I'm really excited with how it looks. It looks so good in there. Finally got a K-Series in this car. It's been a long time coming. So yeah, let's get the crane on it and let's get going.
All right, so I got the engine all in, and it definitely took a little bit longer than I thought it would just to get it all lined up. It took probably a good hour and 15 minutes. And I had this mount the other way because it's a dual height compatible mount. And this is a K24 transmission, so I had to have it on the lower part, or at least this is the way I ended up getting it to be able to line up. And then I have this one on the upper hole because there's two holes for different heights. And the biggest thing that held me back was this rear torque mount, because this bracket I had on backwards. I had it upside down, and the ears here were too low, and it took me a few minutes to figure it out. But getting it unbolted and bolted from the engine and transmission is really not that bad, so I just flipped it around and then it all lined up real well. But she's in there, and this thing is solid. It's not going anywhere. So that's one thing that's done, and I can get that. That's checked off the list. So I'm going to go ahead and get the wiring done next, get the cables mounted up. I need to get a fuel line going, and then as long as I can get a fuel line and I can get all the wiring done, I can go ahead and at least fire this thing up and just hear it run for a few seconds before I button up all the other things. But I just want to make sure the engine's good before I go ahead and do everything else. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the fuel and the wiring, and then just start knocking everything else off the list. Alright guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the content, and follow along for more content just like this.